The ice-crusted wind scraped across the timber walls of the homestead, just as Willa Voss heard the sound that changed everything. A thin, desperate cry cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade through frost. She had been awake already, stoking the fire in her small main room, preparing for another day of tending her sheep and repairing the winter damage to her fences. Her green fingers paused on the poker as the sound came again, weaker this time, and her heart lurched. Willa crossed to the door in 3 long strides, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards despite her solid build. When she pulled the heavy door open, the cold struck her face like a slap, but she barely noticed. There, on her doorstep, wrapped in blankets that were already stiffening with ice, was a basket. Inside the basket was a baby. Willa did not hesitate. She scooped the basket up and kicked the door shut behind her, carrying the tiny bundle to the fire. Her hands, calloused from years of frontier work, were remarkably gentle as she peeled back the frozen layers. The infant was so small, red-faced and furious, tiny fists waving as it wailed. A boy, she saw, perhaps only days old. His skin was pale from the cold but warming already in the firelight. No note, no explanation, just a child left on her doorstep like an unwanted parcel. "Hush now," Willa murmured, her voice rough from disuse. She lived alone and often went days without speaking. "You are safe, I have you." She had no milk to give him, but she had goat's milk in her cold box, and she warmed some carefully, testing it on her wrist the way she had seen human mothers do in the village markets. The baby latched onto the cloth she had soaked and sucked desperately, his cries subsiding into small, pitiful whimpers. Willa held him close, feeling the fragile weight of him, the trust in that tiny grip on her finger. Dawn was still an hour away when the knock came. Willa's head snapped up. No one came to her homestead. She lived 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, and most humans avoided her land entirely. She was tolerated in town because she kept to herself and paid her taxes, but no one sought her company. Her hand moved instinctively to the long knife at her belt, then stopped. The baby was sleeping fitfully in the nest of blankets she had made near the fire. The knock came again, harder. Urgent. Willa crossed to the door and opened it with the knife visible in her hand. "What do you want?" The man on her doorstep was human, broad-shouldered and compact, maybe 5'10" with the solid build of someone who worked with his hands. His face was weathered, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by melting snow. His eyes, a pale gray, were wild with something between panic and exhaustion. He looked like he had been running. "My son," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, my son, is he here?" Willa's grip tightened on the knife. "You left a baby on my doorstep in the freezing cold." "No." The word came out sharp, almost broken. "No, I did not. They took him. I have been searching all night. A woman in the valley said she saw someone leave a basket here before dark. Please, is he alive?" Willa studied him for a long moment. His desperation seemed genuine, but she had learned not to trust appearances. Still, the baby had to belong to someone, and this man's terror was too raw to be feigned. She stepped back and gestured with the knife. "Inside," slowly. He obeyed, moving like a man in a dream, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the bundle by the fire. A sound escaped him, something too ragged to be a word, and he dropped to his knees beside the sleeping infant. His hands hovered over the baby as if he was afraid to touch, afraid the child might disappear. "Bram," he whispered. "His name is Bram." Willa closed the door and stayed between the man and the exit, knife still ready. Who took him? Why would someone leave a newborn to freeze? The man did not look up from the baby. His hand finally settled on the small chest, feeling the rise and fall of breath, and his shoulders shook. My wife died bringing him into the world 3 days ago. Her family blamed me, said I killed her, said I was unfit to raise him." His voice was flat, drained. "They took him while I was burying her. I searched their homes, but they had moved him. I thought he was dead." Willa felt something twist in her chest. She had seen grief before, had worn it herself, and this man was drowning in it. But that did not mean she could simply hand over the baby. "You are asking me to believe that your family left a newborn on the doorstep of an orc they have never met, in the middle of winter, and expected him to survive? No." He finally looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "They expected him to die. They wanted him to die, so they could blame me and be done with the reminder of their daughter." The words hung in the cold air. Willa's jaw tightened. She had lived on the edges of human society long enough to know that cruelty often wore the mask of righteousness. "What is your name, Nathaniel Brennan?" He straightened slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I am a carpenter. I have a small holding near the crossroads, about 8 miles south. I can show you proof, papers, anything you need." "I need more than papers to trust you with a child." Willa crossed her arms, the knife still visible. "For all I know, you are the one who left him here and came back with this story." Nathaniel's jaw clenched, but he did not rise to the anger. He just looked tired. "What would you have me do? Tell me about your wife." He flinched as if she had struck him, but after a moment he spoke. "Marion. Her name was Marion. We married 2 years ago. She wanted children more than anything. When she told me she was carrying Bram, she cried for joy." His voice cracked. "The birth went wrong. The midwife said it happens sometimes. There was too much blood. Marion held him once, told me to keep him safe, and then she was gone." Willa watched his face as he spoke. Liars looked away, constructed their stories with care. Nathaniel spoke like a man reciting his own death sentence. "And her family? Her parents are dead. She had 2 sisters and a brother. The sisters loved her. They loved her so much they could not see past their grief. They decided I must have done something wrong, worked her too hard, fed her too little. I do not know. The brother just wanted someone to blame." Nathaniel looked back at the sleeping baby. "I buried Marion yesterday morning. When I returned home, Bram was gone. I tracked the brother to his house, but he laughed at me. Said Bram was being taken care of. I threatened to go to the magistrate, and he told me the baby was already gone, that I would never find him. That it was better this way. Better that a child die than be raised by his father." Willa's voice was cold. "Better that I suffer, I think. They wanted me to hurt." Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists. "I went to every house in the family, every neighbor. Finally, an old woman who lives near my sister-in-law told me she had seen someone carrying a basket toward the northern holdings before sunset. She described this place, so I ran." Willa was silent for a long time. The baby stirred in his blankets, making a small sound, and Nathaniel's entire body tensed as if ready to leap to the child's aid. That instinct, at least, seemed genuine. But Willa had not survived alone on the frontier by being careless. "You will stay here," she said finally. "You will sleep in the barn. In 3 days, if I believe you are who you say you are, you may take him." Nathaniel looked up sharply. 3 days. He is my son. He is a baby who was left to die. I will not hand him to a stranger based on words alone." Willa's voice was firm. "If you truly are his father, you will agree to this. If you are not, you will leave now and I will find the magistrate myself." The war on Nathaniel's face was visible, raw. Every instinct in him clearly screamed to take the child and run. But after a moment that stretched like hours, he nodded. 3 days, but I stay close. I need to know he is safe. He will be safer with me than he was on my doorstep." Willa gestured to the door with her knife. "The barn is warm enough. There are blankets in the loft." Nathaniel stood slowly, his eyes lingering on the baby. "May I hold him?" Just for a moment. Willa considered refusing, then relented with a short nod. Nathaniel approached the fire as if walking on sacred ground and knelt again. He lifted Bram with the careful awkwardness of a new father, supporting the small head, cradling the tiny body against his chest. The baby's face scrunched up, then relaxed, and Nathaniel closed his eyes. "I thought you were gone," he whispered to the child. "I thought I had lost you both." Willa looked away, giving him that moment of privacy. When she looked back, Nathaniel was laying Bram down again, his movements infinitely gentle. He stood and walked to the door without another word. Willa watched him go, then barred the door behind him and returned to the fire. The baby slept on, oblivious to the storm he had brought into her quiet life. Over the next 3 days, Willa learned the truth of Nathaniel Brennan piece by piece. He did not ask to come inside again, though she saw him watching the house from the barn door whenever she moved past a window. He chopped wood without being asked, stacking it neatly against the side of the house. He repaired a section of her fence that had been sagging since the last storm. He worked with the focused intensity of a man trying to outrun his thoughts. Willa cared for Bram with a tenderness that surprised her. She had never wanted children of her own, had never expected to have them. Orc women were rare this far into human territory, and the idea of finding a mate had long since faded from her mind. But holding the small, warm weight of the baby as she fed him, watching his unfocused eyes gradually begin to track her face, she felt something shift inside her. On the second day, she let Nathaniel come inside to see the child. He sat by the fire, silent and still, while Bram slept in his arms. Willa prepared a simple meal of bread and stew, and Nathaniel ate without tasting, his attention never leaving the baby. "You are good with him," Nathaniel said finally, his voice quiet. Willa shrugged. "I have raised lambs and kids. The principle is similar." A ghost of a smile crossed Nathaniel's face, there and gone in an instant. "I do not think my son would appreciate being compared to a goat. He is too young to have opinions." Willa sat across from him, studying his face. He looked less wild now, more grounded, though the grief still shadowed his eyes. "Tell me about your holding." Nathaniel described it as he fed Bram with the goat's milk Willa had warmed. A modest house, smaller than hers, with a workshop attached. He made furniture, he said, and did repairs for the surrounding farms. The work was steady enough to live on, though not enough to grow rich. Marion had kept a garden and chickens. He did not know if he could manage both the work and a baby alone, but he would learn. "You have no other family?" Willa asked. "My parents are dead. I have a sister, but she married a man in the southern provinces. We write once a year, perhaps." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I am alone now, but that does not make me unfit." "I did not say it did." Willa leaned back in her chair. "But raising a child alone is hard. Raising a baby alone is harder. I know." He looked down at Bram and his voice softened. "But he is all I have left of her. I will not fail him." On the third day, Willa made her decision. She walked out to the barn at dawn and found Nathaniel already awake, sitting on a bale of hay with his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. "I believe you," Willa said without preamble. "You are Bram's father, but I have a condition before you take him." Nathaniel stood slowly. "What condition?" "You will bring him here twice a week. I will help you care for him until he is old enough to survive on goat's milk and mashed food. You do not have a wet nurse, and you cannot feed him yourself. He needs more care than you can provide alone right now." Willa crossed her arms. "In return, you will help me with my holding. Repairs, heavy work, it is a fair trade." Nathaniel stared at her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Because he deserves to live." Willa's voice was firm. And because no child should be alone in the world if there are people willing to help. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then he nodded, a sharp, decisive movement. Agreed, twice a week. More if you will allow it. We will see. Willa turned to leave, then paused. You can take him home today, but you will bring him back tomorrow. She did not wait for his response. When she returned to the house, Nathaniel followed a few minutes later. He gathered Bram and the blankets with the careful movements of a man handling something infinitely precious. At the door, he stopped and looked back at Willa. "Thank you," he said, and the rawness in his voice made her chest tighten. "Do not thank me yet. Keeping a baby alive is harder than finding one." But her tone was gentler than her words, and Nathaniel seemed to understand. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and soon the visits blurred into a routine. Nathaniel would arrive in the morning with Bram bundled against the cold, and Willa would take the baby while Nathaniel worked on whatever project she had set aside for him. He rebuilt her chicken coop, reinforced her barn doors, and constructed a new bench for her workroom. In return, Willa fed Bram, changed him, and taught Nathaniel the small skills of infant care that did not come naturally to a grieving carpenter. They spoke little at first. Nathaniel was not a man of many words, and Willa had grown accustomed to silence. But slowly, in the quiet moments between tasks, conversation began to grow. Nathaniel told her about his work, the satisfaction of shaping wood into something useful and beautiful. Willa spoke of her sheep, the challenges of managing a holding alone, the small victories of a good lambing season. They did not speak of Marion or of the family that had tried to kill Bram, but the grief hung between them like a third presence. Winter began to loosen its grip as the weeks passed. The snow melted into mud, and the first green shoots appeared in the fields. Bram grew, his small body filling out, his eyes beginning to focus and follow movement. He cried less and slept more, and Nathaniel's face lost some of its haunted edge. It was on a morning in early spring, nearly 2 months after that first dawn, when the trouble returned. Willa was outside, checking her fences when she heard the sound of horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders approaching from the south. Her jaw tightened. Visitors were never a good sign. The riders stopped at the edge of her property, and Willa recognized the look of them immediately. Well-dressed, well-fed, the kind of people who expected the world to bend to their will. 2 women and a man, all in their 30s or 40s, with the same sharp features and cold eyes. The man dismounted first, his gaze sweeping over Willa with poorly concealed disdain. "You are the orc woman who lives here?" he asked, his voice clipped. "I am Willa Voss, and this is my land." Willa kept her voice level. "State your business. We are looking for Nathaniel Brennan. We have reason to believe he has been coming here." The man's eyes narrowed. "We also have reason to believe he has our nephew with him." Willa's blood went cold. These were Marion's siblings. The ones who had left Bram to die. She kept her expression neutral. "I know Nathaniel Brennan. He does work for me sometimes. As for a child, I have seen none. Do not lie to us." One of the women urged her horse forward, her face twisted with anger. "We know he found the baby. We know he has been bringing the child here. You have been helping him hide our nephew from his rightful family." "Rightful family?" Willa let her voice turn cold. "You mean the people who left a newborn on my doorstep to freeze to death?" The man's face darkened. "We did no such thing. The child was placed in a safe location where he would be found and cared for by someone appropriate. It is not our fault if you involved yourself in matters that do not concern you. A baby left to die concerns me when he is on my doorstep." Willa took a step forward, and all 3 riders tensed. She was not large for an orc, barely taller than the man, but her reputation clearly preceded her. Nathaniel is the child's father. He has every right to raise his son. He has no such right. The second woman spoke now, her voice shaking with emotion. He killed our sister. Marion died because of him, and we will not let him destroy her child as well. Marion died in childbirth. It is a tragedy, but it is not murder. Willa's hands clenched. You have no legal claim to the child. We have filed a petition with the circuit magistrate, the man said coldly. We are seeking guardianship on the grounds that Nathaniel is an unfit father, and we will argue that any woman who consorts with orcs is equally unfit to care for a human child. The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. Willa felt a flash of anger so intense it took all her control not to reach for her knife. Get off my land. We will leave when we are ready. The man smiled, a thin, cruel expression. The magistrate will be arriving in the next village within the month. We will see you both at the hearing. And when we win, you will hand over the child and never see him again. That is a promise. They turned their horses and rode away, leaving Willa standing alone in the muddy field. Her hands were shaking, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. She had to find Nathaniel. He had to know what was coming. She found him an hour later at his holding, working in his shop with Bram sleeping in a cradle nearby. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his tools immediately. What happened? Willa told him everything. Nathaniel listened in silence, his face growing harder with each word. When she finished, he looked down at Bram and his voice was quiet. They will not take him. They have filed a legal claim. We have to fight this properly, Nathaniel. If we run, they will hunt us down and we will lose any chance of keeping him safe. Willa moved closer, her voice urgent. We need to prove you are fit to raise him, and we need to show the magistrate that leaving him on my doorstep was attempted murder. How do we prove that? Nathaniel's eyes were bleak. It is our word against theirs. They will say they left him somewhere safe and I moved him to implicate them. They have money and position. I am a carpenter. You are an orc. The magistrate will believe them. Not if we have a witness. Willa straightened. You said an old woman told you where to find Bram. She saw them leave him. If she will testify, we have proof. Nathaniel's expression shifted, hope and fear warring on his face. Her name is Marjorie Collins. She lives alone near the crossroads, but she is old, Willa, frail. I do not know if she will stand against Marion's family in front of a magistrate. Then we convince her. Willa's voice was firm. Because if we do not, they will take Bram and you know what will happen then. Nathaniel nodded slowly. They will kill him. Quietly, in some way that looks like an accident, and I will never be able to prove it was them. Then we fight. Willa met his eyes. We have a month. We prepare, we gather evidence, and we show the magistrate the truth. For the first time since Marion's siblings had left her holding, Willa saw something shift in Nathaniel's face. Determination. He reached down and lifted Bram from the cradle, holding the baby close. We fight, he agreed. The next month was a blur of preparation. Willa and Nathaniel visited Marjorie Collins together, and the old woman proved to be sharper than her frail appearance suggested. She agreed to testify, her voice steady as she described seeing Marion's brother carrying a basket toward the northern holdings just before sunset on that frozen night. She had thought it was strange at the time, she said, but had not understood the significance until Nathaniel came looking for his son. They also gathered statements from the midwife who had attended Marion's birth, who confirmed that the death had been a natural tragedy, not the result of neglect or abuse. Nathaniel's neighbors provided letters attesting to his character, his work ethic, his love for his late wife. It was not much, but it was something. Through it all, Willa and Nathaniel fell into a deeper rhythm of partnership. He spent more time at her holding than his own, bringing Bram in the mornings and staying late into the evenings. They cooked together, worked together, cared for the baby together. Willa found herself looking forward to the sound of his horse on the road, to the quiet companionship of his presence. Nathaniel, for his part, seemed to relax in her company in a way he did not with anyone else. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Bram sleeping between them, Nathaniel spoke into the comfortable silence. "Why are you doing this? Fighting for us? You could have given him to me that first day and been done with all of it." Willa looked at the baby, at his small, peaceful face. "I told you, no child should be alone. It is more than that." Nathaniel's voice was soft. "You care about him, about us." Willa did not answer immediately. She did care more than she had expected to, more than was safe. She had built her life on solitude and self-reliance, and letting these two into her heart was a risk she had never planned to take. But it was too late now. The damage was done. "Yes," she said finally. "I care." Nathaniel reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, solid. "I care too," he said, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "About you, I do not know when it happened, but it did." Willa's heart was pounding. "Nathaniel, you are grieving. You just lost your wife. You do not know what you feel." "I know exactly what I feel." His grip tightened. "I loved Marion. I will always love her, but she is gone and I am here and so are you. And when I think about the future, about raising Bram, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Willa wanted to pull away to protect herself from the inevitable hurt, but she did not. Instead, she laced her fingers through his and held on. "We have to win this fight first. Everything else can wait." "I know." Nathaniel smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed his face. "But I wanted you to know, in case the worst happens. I wanted you to know." The day of the hearing arrived with a pale spring sun and a cold wind. The circuit magistrate had set up in the village's largest inn, a drafty building with a main room that served as a makeshift courtroom. Willa and Nathaniel arrived early. Bram bundled in Willa's arms and took their seats at the front. Marjorie Collins was already there, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight despite her age. Marion's siblings arrived moments later, accompanied by a lawyer from the county seat. The man was sleek and well-spoken, his smile sharp as a blade. He nodded to the magistrate, a grizzled older man with the look of someone who had seen too much of humanity's worst, and took his place opposite Willa and Nathaniel. The hearing began with the lawyer presenting the family's case. Nathaniel Brennan, he argued, was a man undone by grief, incapable of providing the stable home a child needed. Furthermore, he had formed an inappropriate alliance with an orc woman, exposing the child to danger and impropriety. The family, loving and respectable, sought only to provide the child with a proper upbringing in a proper home. The magistrate listened without expression, then turned to Nathaniel. "Do you have representation, Mr. Brennan?" "No, sir, I speak for myself." Nathaniel stood, his voice steady. "And I say that everything they have claimed is a lie designed to cover their own crime." The lawyer smiled. "A serious accusation, Mr. Brennan. Do you have proof?" "I do." Nathaniel gestured to Marjorie Collins. "This woman witnessed Marion's brother abandoning my son on a freezing night. She will testify to what she saw." Marjorie stood, and her voice was clear and firm as she described the events of that night. The lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting her age had made her confused, but Marjorie held her ground. She knew what she had seen, she said, and she would not be intimidated into changing her story. The magistrate made notes, his expression unreadable. "Anything else, Mr. Brennan?" Nathaniel presented the midwife's testimony and the letters from his neighbors. The lawyer waved them off as irrelevant, but the magistrate read each one carefully. Finally, he looked at Willa. And you, Miss Voss, what is your role in this matter? Willa stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I found the baby on my doorstep, nearly frozen to death. I took him in and cared for him. When Nathaniel arrived, I insisted on knowing him before I would trust him with the child. I have helped him care for Bram since then, and I have seen nothing that suggests he is unfit. He is a good father. The lawyer leaned forward. Miss Voss, is it true that Mr. Brennan spends a great deal of time at your holding, often staying late into the evening? Willa's jaw tightened. He comes to my holding because I help him care for his son. There is nothing improper about it. So you say. But the appearance of impropriety is enough to question Mr. Brennan's judgment, is it not? And your own. The lawyer's smile widened. An orc woman and a human widower, raising a child together. Surely you can see how this would concern any reasonable person. The only thing that concerns me is that 3 people tried to murder a baby to punish his father. Willa's voice cut through the room like a knife. And now they are using prejudice and lies to finish what they started. The magistrate raised a hand. That is enough. I will hear from the family now. Marion's brother took the stand, his face a mask of sorrowful dignity. He denied abandoning the child, claiming instead that he had arranged for Bram to be taken to a reputable family who could provide proper care. The basket had been left with clear instructions, he said, and it was not his fault if those instructions had been ignored. As for Nathaniel, the man was clearly unstable, driven mad by grief, and unfit to raise a child alone. The magistrate listened, asked a few pointed questions, and then called for a recess. Willa and Nathaniel waited outside in the cold, Bram fussing in Willa's arms. Nathaniel was silent, his face drawn, and Willa could feel the fear radiating from him. Whatever happens, she said quietly, we do not give up. If the magistrate rules against us, we appeal. We keep fighting. Nathaniel looked at her, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have found a way. You are stronger than you think. Willa shifted Bram to her other arm. But I am glad I could help. The magistrate called them back inside an hour later. The room was silent as he shuffled through his notes, his face giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up. I have heard both sides of this matter, and I have reviewed the evidence presented. The claim that Mr. Brennan is unfit to raise his son is not supported by the facts. The testimony of his neighbors and the midwife confirm that he is a man of good character who loved his wife and loves his child. The suggestion that his association with Miss Voss is improper is based on prejudice, not evidence. The magistrate's gaze shifted to Marion's siblings. However, the accusation that you abandoned the child with the intent to cause his death is serious. Miss Collins's testimony is credible, and it directly contradicts your claim that the child was left with proper arrangements. The lawyer stood. Your Honor, Miss Collins is an elderly woman who may have been mistaken about what she saw. There is no concrete proof. There is enough proof to warrant investigation. The magistrate's voice was sharp. And there is certainly enough to deny your petition for guardianship. Mr. Brennan is the child's natural father, and I see no reason to remove the boy from his care. Petition denied. The room erupted. Marion's siblings were on their feet, shouting, and the lawyer was arguing over the noise, but Willa barely heard them. She was looking at Nathaniel, who had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. She reached out and touched his arm, and he looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. We won, he said, his voice breaking. We won. You won. Willa smiled, and for the first time in months she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. He is yours, Nathaniel. They cannot take him. The magistrate banged his gavel, calling for order, and the room gradually quieted. Marion's siblings left without another word, their faces dark with fury, but Willa did not care. They had lost, and Bram was safe. That was all that mattered. Outside, Marjorie Collins was waiting, her face creased with a smile. "Well done, both of you. That child is lucky to have you." Nathaniel shook her hand, his gratitude too deep for words, and Willa thanked her as well. They walked back to Willa's holding together, Bram dozing in Nathaniel's arms, and the spring air felt warmer than it had in weeks. That night, as they sat by the fire, Nathaniel finally spoke the words that had been building between them for weeks. "Willa, I do not want to go back to living alone. I do not want to raise Bram alone. I want us to be a family, all three of us." Willa looked at him, at the hope and fear in his eyes, and felt her own heart twist. "Nathaniel, I am an orc. You are human. People will talk. They will make your life harder. Let them talk. I do not care." Nathaniel set Bram down gently and moved to kneel in front of her. "I love you, Willa. I do not know when it happened, but it did. And I think you love me too." Willa's breath caught. She did love him, had loved him for weeks now without admitting it to herself. But love and practicality were not the same thing. "What are you asking me?" "I am asking you to marry me. To be Bram's mother, to build a life with us." Nathaniel took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "I know it is fast. I know it is complicated, but I also know that I have never been more certain of anything." Willa looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of green and pale skin, and thought about all the reasons she should say no. The prejudice they would face. The dangers of being a mixed family in a world that did not trust orcs. The sheer impossibility of making it work. But then she looked at Bram, sleeping peacefully by the fire, and at Nathaniel, whose eyes held nothing but hope and love, and she realized that none of those reasons mattered. She had already chosen them, weeks ago, the moment she had decided to fight for them. The rest was just details. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathaniel's face broke into a smile so wide it looked like it hurt, and he pulled her into his arms. Willa held him tightly, feeling the solid warmth of him, the realness of this impossible moment. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, while the fire crackled and Bram slept on. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at Willa's holding, with Marjorie Collins and a few of Nathaniel's neighbors in attendance. There was no priest willing to perform the ceremony, so they spoke their vows to each other before witnesses and called it done. It was not legal in the eyes of the church, but it was real in the eyes of the people who mattered, and that was enough. Nathaniel moved into Willa's holding, bringing his tools and what few possessions he had. They combined their lives with surprising ease, falling into a rhythm of shared work and shared care for Bram. Nathaniel continued his carpentry, building a new workshop near the barn, and Willa managed the sheep and the holding. In the evenings they cooked together, ate together, and sat by the fire with Bram between them. The prejudice Willa had feared did come, but it was quieter than she had expected. Some of the neighbors stopped visiting. Some of the merchants in the village gave them cold looks, but there were others who simply shrugged and went on with their lives. Marjorie Collins visited often, her sharp eyes taking in the changes with approval. And slowly, grudgingly, the world adjusted to the fact that Willa and Nathaniel were a family. Bram thrived. By his first summer he was crawling, his small hands grasping at everything in reach. By his first autumn, he was taking his first wobbly steps, and Willa and Nathaniel cheered as if he had conquered a mountain. He was a cheerful child, quick to laugh and slow to cry, and he loved them both with the uncomplicated intensity of the very young. Willa had not thought her heart could hold so much love, but Bram proved her wrong every day. As the seasons turned and the second winter approached, Willa found herself reflecting on the strangeness of her life. A year ago, she had been alone, convinced that solitude was her fate. Now she had a husband and a son, a family she had never expected and would never have chosen if given the choice in the abstract. But standing in the doorway of her home, watching Nathaniel teach Bram to stack wooden blocks while the fire crackled, she could not imagine any other life. Nathaniel looked up and caught her watching, and his smile was soft. "What are you thinking about? How much has changed?" Willa moved to join them, sitting on the floor beside Bram. "How different everything is now. Good different." Nathaniel's voice was tentative, as if he still feared she might regret her choice. "Yes." Willa reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Good different." Bram toppled his tower of blocks and laughed, a bright, joyful sound, and Nathaniel laughed with him. Willa watched them, her husband and her son, and felt a peace she had never known settle into her bones. This was her family. This was her life, and she would fight to protect it for as long as she drew breath. The winter was gentler than the one that had brought Bram to her door. The snow fell soft and steady, blanketing the world in white, and inside the holding, warmth and light kept the darkness at bay. Nathaniel spent his days in the workshop, crafting furniture for the village and toys for Bram. Willa tended her sheep and kept the household running, her strength and skill making tasks that would have been burdensome for others seem easy. In the evenings, they read together from the few books Nathaniel had brought from his old home, or they simply sat and talked. Nathaniel spoke more freely now, the silence of grief giving way to the comfort of companionship. He told Willa about his childhood, his apprenticeship to a master carpenter, the dreams he and Marion had shared. Willa, in turn, spoke of her own past, of growing up in an orc clan far to the north, of leaving to find her own path in the human lands. They learned each other's stories, and in learning them, they wove their lives more tightly together. Bram's first birthday came in the heart of winter, and Willa and Nathaniel celebrated with a small cake and gifts Nathaniel had carved from wood. A horse, a dog, a bird with outstretched wings. Bram delighted in them all, clutching the horse in his small fist and babbling happily. Marjorie Collins came to visit, bringing a knitted blanket and her blessing, and the day was filled with simple, quiet joy. That night, after Bram had been put to bed, Nathaniel pulled Willa into his arms and held her close. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me this, for giving us this." Willa rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You do not have to thank me. This is my life too. I know, but I am grateful all the same." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head, and Willa closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the warmth and safety of his embrace. Spring came again, and with it the work of planting and lambing. Bram was walking confidently now, toddling after Willa as she checked the sheep, his laughter ringing out across the fields. Nathaniel built him a small wagon to pull behind him, and Bram spent hours loading it with rocks and sticks, his face serious with the importance of his task. One afternoon, as Willa was working in the garden, she heard the sound of horses again. Her stomach tightened instinctively, the memory of Marion's siblings still fresh, but when she looked up, she saw only a single rider. A woman, older, with graying hair and a kind face. She dismounted and approached slowly, her hands visible and empty. "Are you Willa Voss?" the woman asked. "I am." Willa straightened, wiping the dirt from her hands. "Who are you?" "My name is Catherine Brennan. I am Nathaniel's sister." The woman's eyes were cautious but warm. "I heard about what happened, about the baby and the hearing, and about you. I came to see if it was true." Willa studied her, looking for any sign of hostility or judgment, but found only curiosity. "It is true. Nathaniel and I are married. We are raising his son together." Catherine nodded slowly. "May I see him? Nathaniel, I mean. It has been years." Willa called for Nathaniel, and he emerged from the workshop, Bram in his arms. When he saw his sister, he froze, his face a mix of shock and wariness. "Catherine!" "Hello, Nathaniel." Catherine's voice was soft. "I am sorry I did not come sooner. I only heard about Marion's death a few weeks ago. I came as soon as I could." Nathaniel set Bram down and walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. "You came all this way. You are my brother. Of course I came." Catherine smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. "And I wanted to meet your wife and your son." The reunion was tentative at first, filled with the awkwardness of years apart and lives lived separately. But Catherine was warm and genuine, and she asked no difficult questions. She admired Bram, who was shy at first but soon warmed to her, and she spoke to Willa with respect and interest. By the time she left, promising to visit again soon, Willa felt a weight she had not known she was carrying lift from her shoulders. Nathaniel had family again, real family, who accepted them for who they were. That summer was the best Willa could remember. The sheep thrived, Nathaniel's business grew, and Bram blossomed into a bright, curious child who was endlessly fascinated by the world around him. He learned to say his first words: Mama for Willa, Papa for Nathaniel, and sheep for the animals he loved to watch. Each milestone was a celebration, each day a gift. Nathaniel, too, had changed. The grief that had shadowed him when they first met had not disappeared, but it had softened, integrated into the fabric of who he was. He spoke of Marion sometimes, telling Bram stories about his mother, and Willa encouraged it. Marion was part of their family too, a presence honored and remembered. Not hidden away, one evening as they sat watching the sunset, Nathaniel turned to Willa with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about having more children?" Willa blinked, surprised. "I had not thought about it." "Do you want more?" "I think I do, eventually." Nathaniel smiled. "Bram should have siblings, and I would love to see you with a baby of your own." Willa's heart swelled at the thought, a child that was theirs, born from their love, growing up alongside Bram. It was a future she had never dared to imagine, but now that Nathaniel had spoken it aloud, she wanted it fiercely. "Yes," she said. "I think I would like that." Nathaniel kissed her, slow and sweet, and Willa felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was not alone anymore. She was not an outsider looking in. She was part of something bigger and more beautiful than she had ever dreamed possible. The seasons turned again, bringing another autumn and another winter. Bram grew taller, his vocabulary expanding daily, his curiosity boundless. Catherine visited twice more, bringing gifts and stories, and each time she left, Nathaniel seemed a little lighter, a little more whole. The neighbors grew accustomed to seeing Willa and Nathaniel together, and some even began to nod in greeting when they passed. It was in the second winter, nearly 2 years after Bram had been left on Willa's doorstep, that Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, a series of small signs that she ignored until she could ignore them no longer. When she finally told Nathaniel, his face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, joy, fear, and finally a fierce, protective love. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am sure." Willa covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it." Nathaniel pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "I love you, Willa. I love you so much." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick in the mornings, tired in the afternoons, and her temper grew short as her body changed. But Nathaniel was patient and attentive, taking on more of the household work and caring for Bram when Willa needed to rest. Bram, too, seemed to sense the change, growing gentler and more careful around his mother. Catherine visited again in the spring, and when she learned of the pregnancy, she wept with joy. She brought clothes and blankets she had sewn herself, and she promised to return when the baby was born. Willa, who had never had a sister, found herself growing closer to the older woman, grateful for her kindness and support. The baby was born on a warm summer night, with Marjorie Collins and Catherine both in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Willa feared she would not survive. But Nathaniel was there, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, and when the baby finally arrived, screaming and red-faced, Willa felt a surge of triumph and relief. "A girl," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have a daughter." Nathaniel looked down at the tiny, squirming bundle in Willa's arms, and his face was radiant. "She is perfect." They named her Alina after Willa's mother, and she was indeed perfect. Small and fierce, with a shock of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Bram was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to hold her and touch her and help care for her. Willa watched her family grow and felt a completeness she had never known. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters and lean harvests, illnesses and accidents. But through it all, Willa and Nathaniel held each other up, their love a steady anchor in the chaos of life. Bram grew into a strong, kind boy, and Alina was a bright, fearless girl who kept them all on their toes. Catherine became a regular presence in their lives, a beloved aunt and grandmother figure. And Willa, who had once believed she was meant to live alone, learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected forms. A baby left on a doorstep. A grieving father arriving before sunrise. A love that defied prejudice and fear. A family built not on blood alone, but on choice and commitment, and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. On a cold winter morning, nearly identical to the one that had started it all, Willa stood in her doorway and looked out at the world. The snow was falling softly, blanketing the fields in white, and the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. Inside, she could hear Nathaniel moving about, the children still asleep. She thought about that first morning when she had opened her door to find a baby abandoned and freezing, and marveled at how much her life had changed. She had found Bram, and in finding him, she had found Nathaniel. And in finding Nathaniel, she had found herself. A wife. A mother. A part of something larger than herself. It was not the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen, and she would not trade it for anything. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, and Willa smiled. It was going to be a good day. They were all going to be good days for as long as they had each other. And that, she thought, was more than enough. Nathaniel appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Willa said softly, "and nothing, just how lucky we are." "Not lucky," Nathaniel corrected gently. "Blessed. We are blessed, Willa, all of us." Willa leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had become her foundation. "Yes," she agreed. "We are." Behind them, Bram's voice called out, asking for breakfast, and Alina's laughter rang through the house. Willa and Nathaniel turned together, leaving the cold morning behind, and stepped back into the warmth of their home. Their family. Their life. And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the world, Willa knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not alone on the frontier, but here, surrounded by the people she loved, building a future one day at a time. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had ever dreamed. And it was real and true and hers. The fire crackled in the hearth as they all gathered around the table, Bram helping to set out plates while Alina chattered about the snow outside. Nathaniel caught Willa's eye across the room, and the look they shared needed no words. It was a look of understanding, of gratitude, of love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. They had found each other in the darkest of times, and together they had built something beautiful. A family forged not in ease but in struggle. A love tested by loss and hardship and prejudice, and proven true. And as they sat down to their simple breakfast, with the winter sun streaming through the windows and the children's laughter filling the air, Willa knew that this was the happily ever after she had never thought to seek. It was not perfect. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together as they had faced everything else, and that was all that mattered. Not the opinions of strangers or the prejudices of the world, but the small, fierce circle of love they had created within these walls. Nathaniel reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and sure, and Willa squeezed back. No words were needed. They understood each other perfectly as they always had. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had fought so hard to protect, Willa felt a peace deeper than anything she had ever known. The future stretched out before them, unknown and uncertain, but they would walk into it together. Nathaniel and Willa, Bram and Alina, a family bound not just by law or blood, but by choice, by love, by the unbreakable bonds they had forged in fire and darkness and emerged with into the light. And that, Willa thought as she looked around the table at the faces she loved most in the world, was the greatest gift of all.